It was a chilly Wednesday night in early October, and Ben, a delivery driver for a local pizzeria, was finishing up his shift. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic replaced by the occasional rustling of wind and the distant wail of sirens. Ben's car, an old sedan that had seen better days, rumbled down the narrow streets of the residential neighborhood. He was ready to head home, his mind already on the comfort of his couch and the half-finished episode of the true crime show he had started earlier. Then his phone buzzed with a new order. Delivery to 680 to Birchwood Avenue, $16.20. Ready for pickup. It wasn't a long drive, but it was in one of the older parts of town, the kind of neighborhood that looked a little too quiet, even for nighttime. Ben hesitated for a moment. The address seemed familiar. It was one of those places that had a reputation, old, isolated, and sometimes a bit too dark for comfort. He'd made deliveries there before, but never this late. Whatever, then muttered to himself, it's just another pizza. He turned the car around and headed toward Birchwood Avenue, his headlights casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks. As he got closer, he noticed that the streetlights were dim, flickering intermittently. The houses here were old too, their lawns overgrown, and the mailboxes rusted. The place had an eerie feel, like it had been stuck in time, frozen in the kind of decay that made you wonder if anyone really lived there anymore. At 682, the porch light was on, but only just. The bulb seemed to be on its last legs, casting a weak yellow glow over the front yard. There was no car in the driveway, no movement behind the curtains. Ben parked, grabbed the pizza, and made his way up the creaky front steps. He rang the doorbell and waited. No response. He rang it again, this time a little louder. A small jolt of unease crept up his spine. The house seemed empty, but the lights were on. He could hear faint rustling inside. Maybe they were just taking a while to get to the door. Ben shifted the pizza to one arm and pulled out his phone to double-check the order. The customer's name was Ellen Miller, no contact number listed, which struck him as odd. It wasn't uncommon, but it was unusual enough to make him wonder. He knocked louder this time, his knuckles rapping against the wooden door. Just as he was about to step back and leave, the door creaked open, slowly, just enough for him to see a sliver of the interior. A woman's voice, muffled, came from behind the door. Just a second. Ben stood there for a moment, his breath clouding in the cold air. The door inched open further, and a woman appeared in the doorway. She was tall, wearing an oversized robe, her hair unkempt, like she hadn't bothered to comb it in days. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, her skin pale. She stared at him for a moment without speaking, as if she hadn't expected him at all. "You're Ellen?" Ben asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. His instincts told him something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The woman nodded slowly, her lips curling into something between a smile and a grimace. "I've been waiting for this," she said, her voice rasping. "Right," Ben said, forcing a smile. "Here's your pizza." She didn't take the box immediately. Instead, she reached out with a shaking hand, and when she spoke again, it was in a whisper. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" Ben froze, suddenly very aware of the darkness around him. He glanced around but saw nothing but the silent street. "No, ma'am. I'm just here to deliver your food." The woman didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze was fixed on something just past his shoulder. "I've been hearing footsteps. At night," she whispered. "Footsteps that follow me." Ben took a step back, his unease turning into discomfort. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He just wanted to finish this delivery and get out of there. "I'm really sorry to hear that. If you need anything else, you can call the pizzeria." But before he could turn to leave, she reached out and grabbed his arm with startling strength. Her fingers dug into his skin, her grip tight, almost desperate. "You should go. You should leave." I'm not safe here," her voice cracked. Ben tried to pull away, but the woman's grip only tightened. He could feel her cold fingers sinking into his flesh, her breath coming out in short, shallow gasps. A chill ran down his spine, and every instinct screamed at him to get the hell out of there. With a burst of adrenaline, Ben yanked his arm free, stumbling backward. His heart was pounding in his chest. He looked back at her, his voice shaking. "I think you need help, Mom." The door slammed shut before he could say anything else. Ben stood there, staring at the house for a long moment, unsure of what had just happened. He glanced down at the pizza box in his hand, suddenly questioning the entire situation. It felt wrong, all wrong. As he turned to head back to his car, a low creak echoed from inside the house. Ben froze, his feet glued to the pavement. He glanced over his shoulder again. There, standing behind the thin curtain of the front window, was a figure, pale, tall, and still. It watched him, not the woman. Something else. Ben didn't wait to see more. He ran back to his car, his hands trembling as he started the engine. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following him. He didn't speak of it again, didn't mention it to anyone at the pizzeria, not even his coworkers. But every time he passed Birchwood Avenue, he glanced nervously at 682, as if waiting for the door to creak open again. Waiting for the woman or whatever she had been to appear. It wasn't until a week later, when a report surfaced on the local news, that Ben learned the truth. Ellen Miller had been missing for years. Her house had been abandoned long before he ever made the delivery. The police found the place had been empty, the lights left on, the door still open as if someone or something had been waiting, and no one, it seemed, had ever left. It had been a quiet Wednesday night when Jason checked the app for his next food delivery. He'd been working at Siciliano's Pizza for just under a year, and by now, he could handle just about anything: late-night orders, difficult customers, weird neighborhoods. But this one was different. The order was for an Arthur Grayson at a house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a street Jason delivered to often, and the address itself was slightly out of the way, tucked behind a row of older houses, but he shrugged it off. It wasn't the first time he'd had an out-of-the-way drop-off. The pizza was ready, and Jason grabbed the 2 large boxes, balancing them carefully in his hands. His car was a beat-up Corolla that had seen better days, and the low hum of the engine was the only sound as he left the pizzeria parking lot and headed into the night. The roads were slick with recent rain, and the streetlights seemed to flicker in and out as he drove, casting everything in an eerie, half-lit glow. When he turned onto Birchwood Lane, the first thing that hit him was how desolate the area felt. The houses were spaced far apart, their lawns overgrown with weeds and untrimmed hedges. The air smelled faintly of mildew, like the whole street had been abandoned for years. Jason wasn't usually nervous about deliveries, but something about this place felt off. He spotted the address, 1545 Birchwood Lane, a large, 2-story house, the kind that looked like it was once beautiful but now stood in a state of decay. The shutters were crooked, and the porch light, which should have been warm and inviting, flickered in a way that made Jason's skin crawl. Still, he shrugged off the unease and parked the car in front of the house. He grabbed the pizzas and walked up the cracked steps to the front door, which was slightly ajar. Jason knocked loudly, but there was no response. He waited a moment, glancing around at the empty street, before knocking again. This time, the door creaked open just a little wider, and a man appeared. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a thin, almost gaunt face. His eyes were sharp, piercing, but there was something off about him, like he hadn't seen the outside world in a long time. His hands were trembling slightly as he reached out to take the pizza. "You must be Mr. Grayson," Jason asked, holding the boxes steady. The man gave a short, shallow nod but said nothing at first. His gaze lingered on Jason for an uncomfortably long time, as if sizing him up. "You have the order." "Yes." The voice was raspy, almost hollow. Jason nodded, a little thrown by the oddity of the man's behavior. "Yeah, it's 2 large pies, 1 pepperoni, 1 vegetarian." The man didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He simply took the pizza boxes and stepped aside to let Jason in. Jason's heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. "I'll just leave it on the porch, if you," Jason began, but Mr. Grayson cut him off, his voice low. "You should come inside. It's cold out there." "I've been waiting." Jason hesitated. It wasn't unheard of for people to invite delivery drivers in, but it was rare and always uncomfortable. Most people preferred the interaction to stay brief. His phone buzzed with another order coming in, and he quickly glanced at the screen, noting that the next delivery was nearby. He didn't have time to linger. No offense, but I've got another drop-off to make," Jason said. But if you need anything, just give us a call at the pizzeria, okay? For a moment, the man just stood there, staring. Then, with a quick motion, he slammed the door shut. Jason blinked, taken aback by the abruptness. He turned to leave, but before he could make it to his car, he heard something behind him, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Jason froze, heart pounding in his chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until the door opened again. Mr. Grayson stepped onto the porch, his eyes wide with a strange intensity. "You don't need to go," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I need someone to stay with me. It's been so long." Jason felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Something about the man's voice, it didn't sound right. Like it was being dragged out of him, as if he was trying to convince himself more than Jason. Jason started, his throat dry. But before he could say anything more, the door behind Mr. Grayson creaked open again, and Jason caught a glimpse of something in the shadowy interior of the house. A shape. It was a figure, tall, thin, and unnaturally still. It stood at the edge of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. Jason's stomach turned. It wasn't the man, not this time. This figure was different. Its posture was rigid, like it was frozen in place. "Who's that?" Jason blurted, his voice higher than he intended. Mr. Grayson didn't respond at first, but his eyes darted nervously toward the shadow. "It's just someone from my past." Jason's pulse quickened. "I think I should go." As he turned to leave, a sharp creaking sound echoed from inside the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone scraping against the floor. Jason didn't wait another second. He sprinted back to his car, throwing open the door and slamming it shut behind him. The engine roared to life as he sped away, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. For the next few minutes, his mind raced. What the hell had just happened? The man had been so strange. And that figure, that thing, it didn't look human. Jason glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes darting back and forth across the dark street. And that's when he saw it. The house. 1545 Birchwood Lane. The porch light was now fully on, casting an eerie, yellow glow across the yard. And standing in the doorway, just past the frame of the door, was the figure. The tall, thin figure. It was looking directly at him. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, and his breathing grew shallow. The figure didn't move, it just stared. And in the light, Jason could see that its eyes were wide open. Its skin was pale and sickly. Jason slammed his foot down on the gas, the car lurching forward, his hands trembling so hard he nearly lost control of the wheel. But even as he drove, even as he put miles between himself and Birchwood Lane, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in the car. A voice whispered, soft, tickled his ear from the back seat. "You shouldn't have left." Jason whipped around, but the back seat was empty. He didn't stop driving until he reached the pizzeria, the sound of his rapid heartbeat the only thing he could hear. He never went back to that part of town again. And no one ever heard from Mr. Grayson or anyone at 1545 Birchwood Lane ever again. It was nearing midnight when Ryan's phone buzzed with the next delivery. He had been driving for Tuscany's Pizza for a few weeks now, taking late-night orders from drunk college kids, lonely office workers, and the occasional party crowd. Most of the time, it was routine. The money was decent, and the job was simple: get the food to them, collect the tip, and move on. But this one felt different. Order for Daniel Griggs. Address: 336 Waverly Crescent. Total: $27.50. Ryan glanced at the map on his phone. The address was in a neighborhood he didn't recognize. It was off the main roads, tucked away behind rows of suburban homes. The street name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He tapped the gas and drove. As he turned down a long, winding road, the streetlights seemed to get dimmer. The houses on either side of him were spread out, each with tall fences and overgrown lawns, and the occasional house had the lights off, shrouded in darkness. Ryan found himself glancing around, unease prickling the back of his neck. He pulled up to 336 Waverly Crescent. The house loomed in front of him, an old, two-story place, with a crumbling brick facade and peeling white shutters. There was no car in the driveway, but the porch light flickered faintly, as if struggling to stay on. The area felt like it had been forgotten by time, and the silence was deafening. It was the kind of place that looked like it should be condemned. Ryan checked the app. No contact number for the customer. Just a name, Daniel Griggs, no notes. Alright, whatever, he muttered to himself. It's just another delivery. He grabbed the pizza and walked up the cracked steps to the front door. It was dark inside, no lights visible through the windows. As he knocked, his knuckles made a dull sound against the wood. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. Just as Ryan was about to walk back to his car, he heard the faintest rustling inside. The door creaked open a few inches, and a man's voice called out from the shadows. "You're here for the pizza." Ryan squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the figure. "Yeah, that's me. You're Daniel Griggs." The man stepped forward into the dim light. He was tall, disheveled, with a worn-out sweater and a mess of graying hair. His eyes were wide, almost frantic, and there was a strange tightness to his expression, like he hadn't smiled in years. "That's me," Daniel said, his voice raspy. "Sorry, I've been waiting." Ryan took a step back, confused. The man didn't seem like he was in any kind of rush, yet he had opened the door as if he had been waiting for Ryan specifically. But there was something in the way he said waiting that felt off, like he had been waiting for something else. Okay, Ryan said, holding out the pizza. "That'll be $27.50. Daniel didn't move to take the pizza at first. He just stood there, staring at Ryan. It wasn't just a look of curiosity. It was something darker, like he was sizing Ryan up. "Can you come inside?" Daniel asked, his voice suddenly quieter, almost pleading. Ryan felt a cold prickle of discomfort crawl up his spine. The offer wasn't unusual. Some customers invited delivery drivers in to use the bathroom or for a drink, but something about Daniel's tone, the strange urgency in his eyes, made Ryan hesitate. I think I'll just leave it on the porch," Ryan said quickly, backing away slightly. "If you need anything else, just call the pizzeria." Daniel's gaze flickered to the pizza, then back to Ryan, his eyes narrowing. No, you need to come inside, please." Ryan's heart started to race. "Listen, I'm just here to drop off food. I don't want any trouble." Before he could back away, Daniel suddenly grabbed the pizza box from Ryan's hands with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly, almost too softly. "But you don't have a choice." Ryan froze, his stomach turning. His eyes darted toward the open door, but something inside was wrong. He couldn't explain it. There was a noise, a sound coming from inside. A low, dragging noise, like something heavy scraping against the floor. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back, his voice shaking. "Listen, I'm just here to drop off food. I don't want any trouble." Daniel's eyes widened, and he looked back over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then, with a single, jerky motion, he slammed the door shut in Ryan's face. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in his chest. He quickly turned and walked back to his car, but his legs felt heavy, like they were moving through water. He had a bad feeling, a terrible feeling, and it only grew worse as he reached his car. He hadn't seen it until now. A figure tall, thin, and hunched was standing at the edge of the driveway, near the corner of the house. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. It was too dark to make out any details, but the figure was watching him. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it didn't quite fit with the human shape it was trying to imitate. Ryan's hands were shaking as he fumbled to unlock the car. His mind screamed at him to get out of there, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. The figure took a step forward, its movements jerky, unnatural. Ryan's heart pounded louder in his chest. Suddenly, the front door opened again. Daniel's voice drifted through the night air, raw and panicked. "You have to go. You can't stay here." Ryan didn't need to hear more. His foot slammed down on the gas pedal, the tires screeching as he peeled out of the driveway and sped down the road. His hands were still shaking as he gripped the wheel. His heart raced, and he kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following him. When he finally reached the main road, Ryan's pulse began to slow. The streetlights seemed brighter now, less ominous. He breathed out a shaky sigh, trying to calm his nerves. But when he looked back in the rearview mirror one last time, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, standing at the edge of Waverly Crescent, was Daniel. His face was pale and twisted, like a mask stretched too tightly over his skull. And behind him, just barely visible in the dark, was the figure, and this time it was smiling. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. He slammed his foot down on the gas, the car surging forward. He didn't dare look back. For what felt like hours, Ryan sped down the road, not slowing down, not stopping for anything. The streets blurred around him, the lights flickering in his peripheral vision, the sound of his tires on the pavement like a drumbeat in his head. When he finally reached the town's center, he didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He parked the car at a gas station, leapt out, and ran inside, nearly knocking the door off its hinges. The clerk behind the counter looked up, startled. "You okay, man?" The clerk asked. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. The image of that thing, the twisted, hungry smile and those hollow, dark eyes still haunted him. He couldn't shake it. His body trembled as he fought for breath. And then he saw it. A figure. A tall, dark shape on the security camera monitor, standing outside the door. Ryan froze. It was too dark to see clearly, but he could tell it was the same figure. The same twisted thing from the house. His heart sank. "It's here." And then, as if it had heard him, the figure turned its head slowly and looked directly at the camera. Ryan's breath hitched. It smiled. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.